Welcome to your body's clues. Is your brain a high-end masterpiece, just a messy survival machine with luxury packaging? Today, we're breaking down the myths, hacks, and hidden genius behind your brain's design. Let's dive in. Many have hailed the human brain, with its 86 billion neurons and hundreds of trillions of connections, as the most intricate object known to science. But for all its power, beauty, and complexity, the brain is also disorderly, full of oddities, and occasionally inefficient. As this course will show, once we look past the myths surrounding the brain, the truth often turns out to be even more astonishing than the fiction. The complexity of the brain is a symphony of imperfect genius. One of the most enduring myths about the human brain is that it's some kind of perfect biological machine, flawlessly engineered, meticulously constructed, and designed with purpose. But the truth is far more fascinating and far more human. The brain is not a product of precision. It's a patchwork, a biological collage made from millions of years of small, opportunistic adaptations, not upgrades, not ideal solutions, but survival-based improvisations layered, stitched, and repurposed over deep evolutionary time. Imagine renovating a house for 1,000 generations without ever tearing it down. That's what evolution did with your brain. Each new improvement had to work with what was already there. No clean slate, no architectural plans, just clever hacks and last-minute fixes that happened to work well enough to be passed on. And some of those fixes, brilliant, others, bizarre, even flawed. Your patchy memory, that's one of them. Your inconsistent attention span, another. The fact that your brain can spot a tiger in the jungle but struggles to remember where you put your keys, that's the trade-off. We carry within us both the wisdom of nature and the bugs of biology. But don't mistake these flaws for failure. What looks like a design error might actually be a side effect of something profound. Your impulsivity, for instance, may seem irrational, but in moments of danger, it can be the difference between life and death. Your tendency to find patterns where none exist. It fuels both superstition and scientific discovery, and your brain's love of illusions, optical, emotional, or cognitive, isn't a glitch. It's a feature that makes art, humor, and imagination possible. To understand these peculiar traits, we must look back not just into history, but into deep time. The brain didn't spring into existence fully formed. It evolved piece by piece through the same slow, experimental process that gave birds wings and whales their lungs. But here's the problem. We don't have a fossil record of thoughts. We can't dig up the moment jealousy evolved, or trace the exact emergence of attention. What we have is inference, clues in anatomy, comparisons across species, and the common threads woven through the behavior of primates, birds, mammals. And does these threads suggest something powerful? The brain's complexity is not the result of a master design, but the unexpected outcome of millions of biological roll of the dice moments that just worked. It's tempting to think evolution had a plan, that there was a vision guiding the formation of the prefrontal cortex or the structure of memory. But that's a human projection. Natural selection doesn't design, it edits. It doesn't aim for perfection. It settles for good enough to survive, and somehow, through this imperfect process, we ended up with something extraordinary, a brain that misfires and also composes symphonies, that forgets names and dreams in metaphor, that panics over nothing, and ponders the nature of the universe, not flawless, not efficient, but astonishing nonetheless. Variability is the beautiful chaos within. The human brain is often seen as a marvel of precision and purpose, but its real brilliance lies in its messy, adaptive design. At the heart of this design are neurons, the building blocks of thought, memory, movement, and sensation. These tiny cells aren't perfect. In fact, they are living proof that the brain didn't emerge from a clean engineering process, but rather from a long, chaotic history of trial, error, and survival. Evolution didn't give us a blueprint, it gave us variation and then it let nature experiment. Natural selection only works if there's something to select from. If every organism were a carbon copy of the next, there would be no raw material for change, no flexibility, no future. That's why diversity isn't just a side effect, it's the engine of evolution, and that diversity is visible down to the level of individual brain cells. Neurons differ in nearly every way imaginable, in size from tiny local messengers to cells with axons stretching across brain hemispheres, in shape with branching dendrites like trees or simple stubs for receiving input. In firing patterns, some buzz constantly, others wait in silence until the moment is right. In sensitivity, some react to a whisper of chemical signals, others need a flood. Even their purpose varies wildly. Some neurons translate light into vision, others coordinate your muscles. Some allow you to speak, remember, or even make complex moral decisions. Each neuron has three main parts: dendrites, which gather incoming signals; the cell body, where life-sustaining functions occur; and the axon, a long extension that transmits the signal to other cells. Some neurons, like those in your retina, connect directly with the outside world, simple in form but essential in function. Others are tangled networks, coordinating dozens of brain regions in milliseconds. This intricate variety is not elegant design, it's improvisation. It's what happens when evolution keeps what works, even if it's clunky or strange. One neuron may serve a single function. Another may link memories, emotions, and physical reflexes in one loop. No single neuron is conscious. No cell understands its role in your decisions. And yet, together, in staggering numbers, they create something that feels like a self. This is where the mystery deepens. How does subjective experience, your thoughts, your desires, your identity emerge from billions of automatic, unthinking units? It's not just a biological question, it's a philosophical one, and it reminds us that what we call intelligence or consciousness is not located in a single cell, but emerges from connection from organized chaos. What's even more humbling? Similar neurons with similar roles exist in monkeys, birds, even mice. Our brains aren't unique in kind, they're unique in degree, and that degree of complexity didn't arrive all at once, it evolved incrementally, unpredictably. From countless tiny changes across our evolutionary tree, not the work of a master designer, but the result of nature tinkering, adapting, and keeping whatever happened to work next. Evolution from bacteria to thought, the neurons that drive our movement, shape our personalities, and allow us to ask who we are didn't appear out of nowhere. They emerged slowly, quietly, through millions of years of microscopic innovation. Some of these neurons, those responsible for motor control, social behavior, and even self-awareness, aren't uniquely human. We share them with primates, dolphins, birds, and even rodents. They're ancient, they're borrowed, they're repurposed parts of an older biological machine. They weren't engineered with foresight, they were shaped through repetition, error, and luck. What we ended up with wasn't a polished final product, it was a messy but miraculous system built layer by layer atop basic cellular scaffolding. But here's the real wonder, the story of how neurons came to be from the simplicity of single-celled organisms to the elegance of the human brain is not just science fiction. It's biology, it's chemistry, it's electricity. So how does a bacterium become a brain cell? It all begins with the membrane, the outer wall of every living cell. This membrane does more than just keep the inside in and the outside out. It creates a subtle but powerful difference in charge between the cell's interior and exterior, a tiny electrical gradient. Like a biological battery, most cells use this electrical tension to manage nutrient flow and internal stability, But neurons took this mechanism and turned it into something revolutionary: communication. When a neuron wants to speak, it briefly opens tiny gates in its membrane. Ions rush in and out. This sudden shift in electrical charge is called depolarization. If the shift is strong enough, it triggers an action potential, a quick, traveling pulse of electricity that zips down the axon like a spark on a wire. When the signal reaches the end, it might directly trigger another neuron, or it might release neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that float across a tiny gap and start the process again. This system is fast, reliable, and scalable, and from this one basic process, the flow of ions across a membrane, came the possibility for sensation, movement, memory, and thought. It's not hard to believe that a neuron could evolve in this way, a gradual build-up of complexity from existing cellular tools. But here's where it gets harder to grasp. How did this electrical trick evolve into language, into philosophy, into a brain that questions its own design? The leap from simple signaling to consciousness feels like magic, but it's really the result of millions of small steps, small tweaks in wiring, in feedback loops, in connection, density, and in structure. Once the first neuron existed, nature got to work, copying, mutating, repurposing, and from one kind came many: neurons that fire rapidly, and others that rest until needed, cells that focus only on motion, and others that interpret abstract ideas, short-range messengers and long-distance couriers connecting entire brain regions. The brain is not the result of a single, dramatic invention. It is an accumulated symphony built not for beauty or efficiency, but for survival. What makes it so extraordinary is that, despite its origins in randomness and replication, it can now imagine the stars, compose symphonies, fall in love, and wonder about itself. That's not perfection. That's something far more interesting: complexity born from chaos. Experience how life shapes the brain. To understand how a brain becomes a mind, we need to look not just at biology, but at experience, self-awareness, identity, memory, empathy. These aren't traits you're born with. A newborn baby doesn't recognize itself in the mirror. It doesn't know where it ends and the world begins. That sense of self, the story we carry in our heads about who we are, is something the brain builds slowly and only through interaction. And here's the fascinating part: a baby and a teenager have about the same number of neurons. What changes dramatically is not the number of brain cells, but the connections between them. The infant brain is like an overgrown forest, dense, tangled, and wild with potential. But nature doesn't keep what it doesn't use. As the brain develops, it begins to prune itself. Neurons that don't connect, that don't find a purpose, begin to wither. They die off in a process called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. This isn't failure, it's refinement. The brain trims away the noise to strengthen the signal. By adulthood, nearly every surviving neuron is part of a functional network, a tightly integrated web that handles perception, memory, movement, emotion, and thought. This pruning is not random, it's guided by use. Neurons that fire together, wired together, and those left silent for too long simply disappear. But early brain development often looks chaotic. Why does one neuron become part of the visual system while another ends up in the emotional core? The answer lies in a combination of chemical signals, genetic instructions, and a hidden network of helper cells called glia. Glial cells don't get the spotlight, but they're the backstage crew that keeps the brain's performance running. They manage nutrients, remove waste, regulate neurotransmitters, and guide neurons into place. Like architects and engineers, there are just as many glial cells as neurons, and without them, the brain would fall into chaos. Neurons are the stars of the show, but glia are the invisible force that makes the show possible. All neurons begin as stem cells, blank slates waiting for direction. In the early stages of brain growth, changes are rapid and unpredictable. Cells divide, migrate, branch out seemingly without order, but slowly, through trial and error, neurons begin to reach out to one another, testing the waters of connection. If they find a partner, they live. If they're ignored, they die. This is how the brain shapes itself. By talking to itself, now zoom out. The same process that happens between two tiny neurons also happens across entire brain systems: the visual cortex, the prefrontal lobe, the limbic system. They all wire together based on one thing: experience. You don't just inherit a brain, you build it with every interaction, every sensation, every moment of attention. Your brain is sculpted by the world around you, by the people you meet, the language you hear, the challenges you face, and the love or neglect you receive. So no, the brain isn't a perfect design. It's not clean, it's not symmetrical, it's not efficient or elegant in the way an engineer might plan, but it's something more powerful. It's alive, adaptive, personal. It is a biological organ shaped not only by millions of years of evolution, but by you, your experiences, your relationships, your past, present, and even imagined future. The brain is not a machine, it's a living record of everything you've ever encountered. Noise. The randomness that makes you human. Even after evolution has shaped the brain, even after experience has wired it, there remains one more hidden element influencing how we think, feel, and behave: noise. Not the noise of traffic or conversation, but the biological kind: cellular noise, neural randomness, internal chaos. Neurons, for all their purpose and complexity, don't always fire with meaning. They don't wait for a perfect command. In fact, even when you're doing nothing, your brain is buzzing with electrical activity, spontaneous action potentials, background signals, flickers of charge across cell membranes. Much of it appears to be random. This is the baseline hum of the brain, a restless internal static that never truly goes silent. Most people imagine that a neuron only fires when it receives a signal, that it's passive until provoked, but the truth is stranger. Neurons have a baseline firing rate, a kind of default rhythm. They send out signals, sometimes meaningless ones even without input, and the brain burns a huge amount of energy just to maintain this hum. Over 20% of your body's energy, in fact, is consumed by your brain, mostly to support activity that has no immediate purpose. So what does all this noise mean? At first glance, it seems inefficient, wasteful. But noise isn't just background, it's raw material, because what matters in the brain isn't always the signal itself, but the change from the noise, the deviation, the pattern that rises from the randomness. This is how attention works, how ideas spark, how emotion emerges. Just as clouds are born from turbulent air, consciousness may emerge from cellular chaos. And that randomness, however frustrating, may be the very thing that gives rise to freedom, flexibility, and imagination. Without it, we might be predictable, mechanical, trapped in logic, loops, and routines. But with noise, we are creative, unstable, surprising. You forget things mid-sentence. You imagine things that never happened. You feel emotions that make no rational sense. And yet, you can invent stories, see symbols in dreams, create art, fall in love. That is noise at work, not as an error, but as a feature. So if the brain is a mosaic of evolution, experience, and design, noise is the blank space between the tiles, the unpredictability that gives the pattern depth. You are not just a machine executing a program, you are a symphony with static in the background, and somehow that static allows for everything that makes you beautifully human. So, is the brain perfectly designed? No, it's messy, it's chaotic, it forgets, misfires, daydreams, and contradicts itself. It's prone to error, illusion, and impulse, and yet it is the very thing that allows us to reflect on its imperfection. It holds not only our instincts, but our questions, not only our reflexes, but our curiosity. It was shaped by nature, wired by experience, and colored by randomness. Not for efficiency, but for adaptability, not for precision, but for possibility, and perhaps that's what makes it priceless. You are not running on a flawless operating system. You are running on a miracle of survival, patched, repurposed, evolving still. Your thoughts are not glitches. They are echoes of ancient instincts, refined by life, sculpted by love, and animated by chance. So the next time your mind wanders, when your memory falters or your emotions rise, don't be so quick to call it broken. It might just be the price of being conscious, and that price is worth everything.